Exciting day today. We have studied together the 5 books of Moses. We studied together the Nevi'im Rishonim. We've studied together the Nevi'im Acharonim. And today we move from Nevi'im to Ketuvim. So questions, the differences between the two, and Nevi'im and Ketuvim is a long list of literature about it. We will try to focus on our chapter today and chapters forward. Of course, Tehilim, David HaMelech is the author of, whether, according to some, all of Tehilim, which is unlikely, some of Tehilim. Some of it was produced before him, according to some. There are all sorts of different sources, and some of them clearly look like they were written after him. Al Naharot Bavel, Sham Yashavnu V'gam Bachinu. How is he talking about sitting on the rivers of Babylon? A verse that I've been thinking about recently. Like we say, Eich Nashir at Shir Hashem al Admat Nechar. How can we sing the song of God on foreign soil, sort of expressing, at least to me, the question with Pesach coming up, this time of freedom and liberation, with all of the horrors that have happened in Israel over the last month. How can we and how should we, and what should we do? Of course, we know in that same psalm it says, we can't forget Jerusalem. So let's go and begin. Ashrei Ha'ish, Psalm 1, Tehilim Parak Aleph. Ashrei Ha'ish asher lo alach b'atzat risha'im, uv'derech chata'im lo amad, uv'moshav leitzim lo yashav. So praiseworthy, happy is the man who's not followed the counsel of the wicked, and has not gone in the ways of the path of the sinners, and did not sit in the company of the insolent and the lazy. And interestingly here, we'll see tomorrow, chapter 2 ends with Ashrei. So those who say that 1 and 2 are really one chapter, that I'm not sure why they would have been split in two, because the envelope structure, the beginning and the end. And one thing that's noteworthy here is to me, it's somebody who has the temptation. It doesn't say praiseworthy is the man who goes in the ways of the righteous, and follows the ways of the non-sinners, of the people who do mitzvot, and sits amongst those who talk about important matters in Torah, etc., etc. It's the temptation, the difficulty of perhaps being surrounded by people who would lead you down the wrong path, who are sitting around speaking lashon hara, whatever it might be. That is the person who has that, and instead, Pasuk Bet, Kiyim b'Torat Adonai cheftzo, u'v'Torato yege yomam v'layla. Rather, the teaching of God is his delight, and he studies the Torah day and night. Good rhyme in the translation. So this is the person who has, it's one thing, if you have no temptation, there's nobody who's you're surrounded by great, wonderful, righteous people. It's much harder when it's not so simple to study and be involved in good matters, in moral matters, in mitzvot, etc., etc. Here it's specifically about Torah. You could understand, does Torah mean just study of Torah? Does it mean the larger corpus of Torah, the following of God's teachings, etc., etc.? That's a question that's not easy to be answered. Just a very interesting point. It's pointed out by a bunch of different people. The beginning of Tehilim, the beginning of Ketuvim, we have this pasuk, Uv'Torato yege yomam v'layla, which reminds us of a pasuk in the beginning of Nevi'im, Sefer Yoshua, right, where God says to Yoshua, right, Lo yamush Sefer HaTorah hazeh mipicha v'higita bo yomam v'layla, right, that the Torah of Moshe has to be in your mouth, in your lips, the studying of it day and night. So interestingly, right, why does Tehilim, why is this the first chapter? Why is something else not the first chapter? That we don't know. But at least you could try to look and understand that there is this link between the two. There's this link between the beginning of Nevi'im, the beginning of Ketuvim, saying that this is a continuation, might be a different book, but we're continuing in the same way. Similar as we talked about in the last chapter of Malachi, how the opening chapter of the book of Yoshua begins with, or has the words, Moshe Avdi Meit, and in the last chapter of Malachi, the end of Malachim, talks about, Zichru Torat Moshe, and God, remember the Torah of Moshe, and Moshe Avdi, same words are used, so here it's almost like that transition is happening again. Continuing verse 3, who is this person who is so righteous? What does he compare to? V'haya ke'et shatul al palgei mayim asher piryo yitain bi'ito v'aleu lo yibol. He's like the tree planted beside the stream of water, which yields its fruits in season, whose foliage never fades, and whatever it produces thrives. Everything is perfect. It's got the best shade, it's got the best wood, it's got the best fruit, it's dependable. It's a person that has all the qualities, all of the great aspects that you would happen. That's what that person is like. Lochein harishaim ki kamotz asher tidfenu rach. Not like the wicked, or like shaf that the wind blows away. And we had comparisons of that in earlier books of Yirmiyahu that talks about the sinners are you think that God's going to come down and give you rain and everything is perfect. Maybe it was Yechezkel, I don't remember, but no, it's God doesn't trust you. You're just like the shaf. Your tshuva is not real. It's just momentary, right? The tree that stands strong and firm and grows up, not this wind that blows away the wickedness everywhere and doesn't stand for anything. Al kain lo yakumu rishaim b'mishpat v'chataim ba'adat tzadikim. And therefore the wicked will not survive judgment, nor will the sinners survive in an assembly of righteousness. Right? Ultimately starts the chapter, and here we see sort of a transition. The chapter starts with this idea of an adat rishaim, but will not be in the Adat Rishayim. The Adat Rishayim eventually will disappear. It will not be there forever. Second transition, the tree was a Ashrei Ish. He was a single person, a single man, a single woman who remained loyal to God's teaching, Torah, all his days. He didn't go to the Atzat Rishayim. He didn't go with the group. There's so many groups that are trying to influence him to act poorly. Here in this verse, he's not alone. There is Adat Tzadikim. There are other righteous people. There's a righteous group that he can be with. Verse 6, the last, Ki yodea Adonai derech tzadikim v'derech rishaim toved. Because God knows the ways of the righteous. My translation here, it says cherishes. I'm not sure where we see the word cherish. But the way of the wicked is lost. It's due. And right, we think of Yediat Hashem, the idea of knowing God. It's something that God's going to recognize, because these are people who are doing what God does. Think of it's not exactly what it says in the Gemara, but think of the Talmud, where it talks that you have to follow God's ways. Mahu rachu, mafatarachu, mahu chanun, afatachanun, in the Gemara Masechet Sota. Just like God is merciful, just like God is compassionate. So God knows the righteous. The righteous are the ones who are acting in the way of God. They have this knowledge of each other. It doesn't say exactly, but it's sort of like the idea. Think of Bitzalel, who builds the Mishkan, which mirrors God's creation of the world. B'Tselel, he was he's the shadow of God. He's B'Tselel. It's short for B'Tselem Elokim, as pointed out by Rashi. So God knows the ways of the righteous, because that is the ways of God. And so here, one other thing just to point out, and we'll conclude with this, which is basically all of what we've had up to this point in our study are questions about national Jewish life. Yeshaya, Yirmiyah, Yechezkel, Hosea, talking about the Jews, talking about the way they've acted. When we focused on an individual, it wasn't just a random individual. It was an individual who was sort of keeping the nation alive, who was so significant that they sort of embodied the nation. Think all the way back to the book of Shemot, where it goes back and forth. This is what happens to the Jews. Here's the story of Moshe. Let's go back to the Jews in Egypt. Here's Moshe and Minyan. Let's go back to the Jews in Egypt. And then Moshe goes down to Egypt, and it all comes together. Or the stories about King David. Those aren't just stories about King David. King David is the king of Israel, and what's happening to him is influencing the entirety of the Jewish people. When David sins, there is great suffering. It's not just him who suffers individually following the Bathsheba affair. He's supplanted as king. Same thing, think about the life of Shmuel or the life of Eliyahu and Elisha. It's not just about their lives, it's about the national project of building this moral and ethical and equitable society in Israel. Here, when we move to Tehilim, it's different. It's personal in this chapter. It's about a person. It's about the way a person's going to act. We move from those national questions to individual questions. It's less about it's targeting the individual. How are you going to act? And even in other chapters where we think that they are more of public or everybody together. I think of the Tehilim, where we talk about all the different instruments, Kol Haneshama, Telel Yahaliyah, all the instruments, pray to God and say hallelujah, right? Each one of us, somebody's playing the trombone and somebody's playing the violin and it's individuals within this group. It's not the sort of the national, it's much less of sort of the national question. And so that may be one of the differences, Tehilim versus the other books. It's okay either way. But a difference in the character, and obviously here we're changing. Here we're going from stories and questions about national struggles and mistakes and errors and how to be better to how can a person connect with God, and how these chapters and these verses can inspire a person perhaps to think about their own life and how then they should and could act. So it's a very different sort of book, and our approach will try to be a little bit different than it's been in the past books, because it has to be.